writing and growing a happy writer. Now, normally in podcasts and live YouTubes and stuff, say, now we have to read stuff from our sponsors. We have Go-Go vitamins, and you take them and you're great, and that's our sponsor. And then there's, Stretch-O-Matic. So we have a machine from the Stretch-O-Matic Dynasty Company. Look, yeah, that's not what we're doing. We're actually just hanging out, chilling out, making a sense of homeschooling so you can be happy and so your kiddos can grow up to be happy actual adults. And that's a trick already, because a lot of times we think if our kids are happy, then they'll grow up to be happy. That's not how it works. And even growing up to be sad, I'll tell you a strange statistic. In the studies I've been to look at, the abuse, when people are abused, the percentage that grow up that abuse is actually only a third of them. And best I can discern, this is across the board in different kinds of abuse. And I'm not saying abuse is fine, it's terrible. But I'm saying what we tend to think is abuse people, but actually that's only 1 in 3. Because a lot of us go through things and we don't want to go near it. I mean, I'm not in politics because Dad was a politician. So there you go. I want to talk about being a happy writer. So now I was trying to say that about first of all, I was saying that about abuse and all, because you can get caught up thinking that there's a causal relationship that is real controllable. Like if you do it just right as a parent, just right as homeschool, just right, everything will turn out great. That's not a thing. That's not the way the game goes. You can bet that way, just like in boxing. The biggest and the baddest doesn't always win, but that's how you bet. If you do homeschool well, if you have a healthy family, have a healthy relationship between the parents, the odds clearly go in your favor, but there are no guarantees. Things can turn out other ways. So what you want to do is do the best you know to do, and hope for the best you can hope for.
Definitely.
Right?
Yes. And that should be freeing. It really should be.
Yeah. I mean, control is not all it's made up to be. We tend to try to do that, to try to control outcomes. And I don't, fortunately, that doesn't always happen, because sometimes we get a whole lot more than we ever deserved. And that's kind of cool. So let's think about writing and growing a happy writer. Now, I will tell you this. There probably is a pretty good correlation. If they're miserable as writers when they're little, they probably won't be very good writers when they're old. But that's a little more specific dynamic. You could probably say that if you have bad experiences with going to a sporting event or playing a sport, you probably aren't going to want to play that sport. That's the odds are still in the favor, no guarantees there, but that experience makes a difference, and especially when we're talking about a skill development like writing. When you hate to write, you won't write. If you hate cantaloupe like I do, you won't eat cantaloupe. What the things you hate, if you have any choice in it, you're going to avoid. So writing, actually, for them to grow the skill, they've got to find it to be rewarding enough or fun enough to get somewhere. Because if it's not, it just becomes a miserable practice that you're glad to get away from. It's the same with schooling. When people have bad experiences with school, they grow up and get out of school and go, "Oh, I'll never read a book again, or I'll never study something again." So that experience is a huge influence. The challenge with family in particular is there are so many moving parts, relatives, friends, everything. There's so many influences. It's not as simple as writing or doing math or something, of that nature. Get us on the screen. So with that said, what I want to do is go through kind of who, what, when, where, why, and how.
Okay.
I've found those to be very helpful questions all my life. And on writing. Now, the goal would be to grow a happy writer. That's actually the aim. So a happy writer is someone who knows how to write. They're pretty good at it. They're happy with the result of their writing, and they're happy in the process of their writing. Now, happy is relative. It could be purposeful. It could be fun. It could be enjoyable. It could be just timeless for them, engaging, so they get in a flow. But that's what you want with your kids. And before I share with you the who, what, when, where, why, and how, I really want you to understand what's wrong with the way most writing is taught. Most writing is taught with really bad premises in play. So they already start out thinking there's a right way to write. So already you're in trouble because is that true? There's a right way to write. You know, have you noticed? Let's say teachers know the right way to write. Now, how many of these teachers actually win Pulitzer Prizes and Nobel Prizes in literature?
Or even published
Or publish or get rich publishing?
or
I do think people are former teachers, some that make it, but there's a reason it's former. They didn't get rich and then quit. They usually get quit so they can go be successful at writing. But nonetheless, we're not talking about all your kids growing up to win Pulitzers or anything like that. But we are saying if writing can become rewarding to them and fun, and they can get better and better at it, what you'll see is it will cultivate in them a love or appreciation or a happy, content enough to write, whether it's emails or whatever else. And that originality, no matter what chat's going to try to teach us or do, that originality we've got is still something beyond what they can do because there's not a way to mechanically put together the way humans can improvise. They can try, maybe they can get close, but they can't because we're not, math is dominoes, so to speak, the algorithms and all in AI. But humans are dominoes that can move, as I've said before. So, an understanding about writing, where you want to begin is to give up and realize that it doesn't make sense to approach writing the way most people approach it. And we could tell this because how many people grow up loving writing? Not many. They find it awkward and difficult. And that's because writing is way harder than math or reading or any of the other things. Learning to read is essential. Math is not harder. People think it is, but the only reason math is harder is because you keep adding new stuff every day. So you keep stretching, change the game. If you just did math and did the same math over and over again, it would be awful. It would be terrible because you'd be bored to death. Well, when you're writing, think of all the things that are going on. You're selecting words, you have an intention, you're playing out grammar decisions, you're picking between words. Some are more automated, you'll know where the is goes. But when you get down to, and she placed and let's say it's supposed to be a blanket on the doll, but it could be a throw, or it could be a cover, or it could be a towel she used as a blanket, and so you're making hundreds of decisions while you're engaged in the process of writing. Now, fortunately, we become masters at language within boundaries, but relative to the other critters on the earth, for sure. But in that way, writing is very difficult and engaging, and it's kind of rewarding that way too. If you understand that, you can appreciate why the current ways we teach writing multiply the misery. It multiplies the misery. So how do they teach writing? What kind of curriculums do they have out there, and how do they do it?
well, they're usually very structured, lots of rules, teaching you about grammar, teaching you about punctuation,
Transitive and intransitive verbs.
That might be a little later.
Subjunctive.
Um,
Passive voice. Don't use that passive voice. Oh, you don't want to use that passive voice. Woohoo.
so it's usually very tedious.
Yes,
A lot of the
tedious. So we have a book
curriculum.
somewhere called the 31 Rules of the Comma. Really? I gotta learn 31 rules about how to use a comma. This is insane. So we do this tedious, rigorous writing game of sentences and verbs, and even learning what they call them. Have you noticed that your, let's say, 6-year-old is pretty amazing or amazingly articulate? That 6-year-old can do wild things with language. They can ask for stuff, they can express stuff, they can make up stories. They make up new phrases. They start doing that at 1 or 2. What was the newest phrase one of the grandkids did? Burned it. It wasn't ta-da, but it was like, hey, y'all, or I don't know what he did.
A tiny person.
Yeah, the little tiny person.
Putting words together.
And they make up their own sentences too. It's amazing how well and how articulate a 6-year-old can be. Now, I say that because do you know how many parts of speech they know? Like phonemes, and constructs and diphthongs, and how the sounds work and all the pieces and all the parts of it. Even in phonetics, all the pieces of the phonetics, they don't know any of that, and they talk great. Somehow someone came up with the idea that if you understand something's a verb compared to a noun, you're going to be better off as a writer. That's insane. That's not a thing. That's never been a thing. It's not in history a thing. We didn't have grammars, until 150 years ago or whatever.
Formal grammar teaching.
Yeah, and so we made up this thing that people that like to do that sort of thing, and I'm not against grammar. I mean, if you're studying, I've had Latin, Greek, Hebrew, English, and Spanish formally. And so when I study something, I do try to analyze it. I'll use language things I know, but not in normal day-to-day conversation or writing. These people who know how to write don't think about verbs and nouns and stuff. That stuff becomes automated and natural and quite cool. So when you start teaching your child a structured thing, it's painful, it's tedious, it's non-inventive, it doesn't have anything to do with their voice, it's trying to get them to sound like somebody else. And so because there's a right way to write. If there was a right way to write, we would all still sound like Shakespeare because they would have taught the right way to write. This is not going to cultivate a happy writer. That's not going to be the game. I'm going to tell you the game, and it's loads of fun. And you got to correct me if I'm wrong. I've never thought of this. I think all of our children will say plenty enjoyed writing. Some liked math more than others. Some didn't. Some liked even reading more than others, depending on what they were reading, But I think they all enjoyed writing.
Do too. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's because of this way of approaching it, that it wasn't tedious. It wasn't a bunch of rules. It wasn't try to remember all these forms. It wasn't turn into a grammar police. It was strictly about helping them learn to play with language so they could write. And so it engaged their inventiveness and their fun.
Right.
So,
I mean, they just caveat, they went off to college not knowing anything about diagramming sentences. They knew what the basics were. They knew what a noun was and a verb was. Just
well, and in foreign
did.
language, they had to learn that. It was part of the requirements in graduating high school. If you have that, you got to teach them grammar. But I wouldn't make grammar a part of the game with learning to write the way I'm going to talk about. So you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't.
Oh, and
but they were great at it.
Majored in English and
2 of them worked for the writing. 2 of them worked for the writing
help centers at
help center at the University of Texas. They got paid to help people, and they basically told me, said, "Yeah, we dumped what they said. We did what you showed us, and all these students would start writing better, because I'm going to tell you the secrets to the universe here. So I want to get onto it enough to know that if you're a child, it's a bell curve. There are going to be some kids that just love boxes and love to fill it in, love to do it right, and more power to them. But the super majority of kids are going to find that to be misery. So tedious diagram, tedious parts of speech, tedious grammar stuff. And that is not actually going to wire up their brain to find their own voice and to really understand what they're doing. It's going to wire them up to hate it. So I'm going to share a different way to think about it. And, we've done this for almost 25 years. When we developed, I've kind of worked this through with my background in literature and communication. And I've written a few books, etc., to put together a way to teach the kids to write that was more engaging for them. And so we've done this for 20 years, and we've had thousands of students, thousands and thousands, and hope for many more. But wanting to have a child fall in love with the writing process, the growth of their writing, their own voice, what they produce, that's the game. So we're going to think about who, what, when, where, why, and how. Most of the time will be spent on the how. And so I'm trying to just really quickly check in on the chat, because I have not done that. I do not understand. Oh, here we go. Yeah, just quick question. Do you actually utilize visualization while homeschooling? So that is a great question. I'll get back to that. And I need you to tell me what visualization is. That would help me dramatically. So throw that in there. So who on writing, who are you trying to teach to write? So we're obviously, especially in a homeschool context, and the who is about the age, like when you start. And bear in mind, writing itself engages clear thought, which means as you write, you look at what you say, and then you realize that's not clear. So it trains you actually to think and communicate clearly. So it's a wonderful thing that you can both write what you've learned and then learn by writing. So it's a very powerful skill in that regard. And Jody will tell you, I'll write things down and then throw them away because I'm done with it, because I used
just
it
to
for,
help him with his
yeah, I
just
I
thinking
used
through
it, yeah,
problem or
yeah. Or when I give a speech, I commonly will make a bunch of notes and then tear them up before I go up there. So, because I again want to engage my voice in the moment and not some echo of sounding like somebody else. So in engaging kids, who I'd say for sure by their time they're 9, especially if they're sharp, they should be able to write on their own and be able to regularly, or I'd say daily, write inventive, imaginative, something new, descriptions, any kind of thing that you'd want them to. And I'm not saying it's going to be at a high school level, but by 9, like 3rd grade, is that right?
Yeah.
I think you're there. You can start at 8, you can start at 7, 6, but they really need to get to some degree reading down before they start writing, because they're related. We do want to write like we talk, but not really. So it's a great way to start if they learn to from reading and from writing, they learn to write words that sound like they would talk. I'm gonna go to the fish camp, but we really don't want to go through this world talking like we're reading stuff. And you can tell it's a different flavor to the language and how it's put together compared to how we write. Some of this is because of our reactive association in people. It's not structured. So writing is a structured thing, and we're just responsive and somewhat all over the place. Knowing that piece, when a child is younger, they need to learn to read. So we're getting reading down, and then they do copy work in those early years, and they have to do the letters,
Well,
learn to do the
handwriting.
handwriting before they can write. And, there might be a typing conversation. I do think there's something powerful about the mechanical nature of actually physically writing. It slows you down. It personalizes the um, even drawing of the letters, and it allows your brain to have another link to it. If typing was the thing to do, we probably wouldn't have notebooks like I have a AirNote, and they have Remarkables and other stuff that allow us to write, because there are things you can do in writing that are just a good bit different. So they have to learn handwriting. And then as they get good at handwriting, do copy work. And the copy work means, they could be copying a passage of a book or section, or maybe just words when they're younger. That all is getting them ready. So they're learning, tweezer dexterity, or if that's tweezer, whichever one it is, and learning to manage it and getting in motion. Transitionally, Jody always liked to um, uh, get them to tell her like a story, and she'd write down their story when they weren't quite ready to write, but they got a vision that way for.
They really love that.
Yeah, they got a vision for being able to make up stories. And so then when they learn to write, they realize that all they're doing is just putting on paper a story in their head.
Mm-hmm.
That would be an amazing approach. So the Who, 8 for sure, 9, they want to really get in motion writing. Some may be a little later, some may be earlier, whatever. So who, what, the what is we're wanting them to learn a skill. So the goal is not exactly to pass a test or to impress people or whatever, but the ability to sit down and to formulate sentences into paragraphs, and it all makes sense and matches the goal of what they want. So they want to write a thank you note, then the goal would be to have the person who reads it appreciate it. And so in appreciating it, the thank you is going to need to come out in information. You gave me, a beautiful new Bentley. I've had the oil changed. It's running so well. The neighbors are so impressed, love Chi-Chi. So it's that focus, that the game is that they're comfortable, they're not intimidated, they don't know where do I start, they understand what they're up to with writing, and they're skilled at doing it, putting the words down on paper in such a way that they're clear and have the effect that they desire, right?
Yeah.
So when the way I would answer the word is not just the age thing we discussed, but it's when do they write, right? So, and I would say that's going to be every day. I mean, honestly, you can punt Sundays, you can punt Saturdays, but I'm just saying, Monday through Friday, school. When you do school, hopefully you do school weekly. And if they learn to write every day, it doesn't have to be a lot. We would do when they were real little, a page every other line. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And they got older, they do 3. But the pages, were they notebook or more like
They were no
workbook? Was it regular
it's
notebook
just a spiral,
size?
yeah,
Okay.
not
Yeah, so
wide rule.
they do 3 up to 3 when they got in their teens, every other page. That's
Mhm,
right.
mhm.
So I'm
No,
just
every other line.
every other line. And basically our goal is that they should be able to write that much in about 20 minutes, 30 minutes for sure. And then we'd grade them. And we had an hour for writing, but I don't think it ever took an hour.
No.
And they would commonly write after school because they got so excited about their story. So it's an everyday thing. I think you're going to be wise to see it done at a consistent moment in the day, certain time. We always had a sequence of how we did reading, writing, and math we've talked about. But that knowing that it's writing time is really important. Not are we going to get around to it or whatever, because learning to write at a time trains them in their skill to be able to write at will, not looking for the right moment, the right inspiration, the right ambiance, the right aroma therapy in the air, but rather it's time to write. Engage that part of your mind that has that skill because it's time to write. And that's how skills work. You don't get in a mood to put a band-aid on your child. You put the band-aid on when you need it. And it takes a little bit of skill. You got to work with them a few times, in my experience. So anything like that, any skill should be able to be used on demand. And same with writing. So who, what, when, where. I'll let you do that one.
Well, we had that part of schools all together at the same time at a table, a kitchen table. Everybody was just sitting down and writing we did it first thing in the morning.
At the same time?
But at the same time.
Why do we do it
every
first thing in the
day.
morning?
Because if it's one of the harder things to do, they get that done. They've conquered they've conquered that. But yeah, we would do that like I said, around a kitchen table.
It wakes their brains up. It's not as high pressured because they're just getting feedback on what they've written. It's not like it's graded or anything like that, like math especially could be. But it is it gauges their brain. It is a little bit harder, and they've already accomplished one of the hard and I think fun to do. Yeah. And so we did it one place. They just need a place to write, as Annie Dillard wrote a book about that. So it needs to be a desk. They need to be sitting. They don't need to be laying in bed or whatever.
They knew how much was expected from them, amount wise, whether it's a
we'll
paragraph.
We'll get to that. That's a how.
Sorry.
So, but a place, the when, is just where. So they need a table. And I'd say a consistent place. It's not, well, go out on the patio and see if you get inspired. It's not that. It's just writing.
And I would, well,
go ahead.
It might be a
how?
Technical thing. When they were smaller, we had a child-sized table that they did school at. So they need to be at a good position to write.
Yeah, it needs to be comfortable.
Doesn't need to be like up here or something like that.
That's just going to make it harder.
Needs to be
cramp their hands and whatever else.
Yeah.
So when we're why. So we talked about why, but the why, this skill integrates their reading, math, problem solving, everything, but it's actually bridging them to communication. So it's getting them to think clearly and get them more effective at the use of words. And the reason for that is because what they're really doing is they're learning to translate through symbols on a page or whatever it is on a page. They're translating what they know already how to speak. They already know grammar. They just don't know the names for stuff because they speak clearly. They have to use grammar, kind of hardwired in the brain. So they're engaged in this communication process. And what they're doing is they're trying to write down on a paper what someone else, if they read it out loud, would say, just like they would say. They're literally taking their thoughts, putting them into symbols in such a way that if somebody else reads them, they're able to sound like and say and actually have the same thoughts as the person, which is quite amazing because it can happen over time and over distance, message in a bottle. I guess that gets both of them. So whole nature of what they're trying to learn to do is to write in such a way. So if somebody reads it out loud, they'll say, yep, that's exactly what I meant to say. And that affects grammar and punctuation, all kinds of stuff. So I'll get to that in a second. One more why. Yeah. And so the why is it's engaging them in learning how to think, and it's engaging them learning how to communicate. And trust me, thinking and communicating are going to be big skills they'll need for the rest of their life. And if you don't have them, it's a real problem. Big employed, stay employed. When you get much older and lose them, it's the same thing. They won't even oftentimes let you stay at home anymore. They have to put you somewhere. when you lose them. That's not true.
Fair.
It's just true,
Oh my
you know.
goodness.
So how? How do you teach them to do it? Well, part of the happiness part of how is for them to grow in success. When people are getting better and better at something, they usually feel good about it. If you want a child to get better and better at writing, you want them to write.
You need to say that again.
Okay. So yeah, I went a little fast. So if you want a child to get better at writing, you want them to write. That's it. Now, the reason is when you write, it has a built-in feedback loop, we would say, that insists on improvement, because you can instantly tell a contrast between what you wanted to sound like and what it did sound like. Sometimes you even write things you go, whoa, where'd that come from? Because it kind of worked. So that engaging process for them is where the happiness comes from. So the first how-to is you want them to write every day. The second thing you want them to understand is that the goal is to write something that's okay, not great. When I taught this originally with groups of 10 kids in our home, I would tell them, if you write something that's great, I'm literally gonna roll it up into a ball and throw it in the trash can. I do not want great. That is a violation of what we're trying to do here. I just want okay. Now, part of that was to chill them out because we get in our heads with grammar and punctuation, all the rest. So these how-tos have to get out of our heads so we can just write. Well, that's a big one. Once they know that the goal is to write something okay, then the second step is to get some help. And the help is feedback. They can help themselves. We found that just literally getting a child to go into another room and read what they wrote out loud has them correct their grammar and punctuation almost flawlessly at some point. So that's the game. You want them to write okay, then get help. And then third, make it great if they want to. That's the aim, make it better, whatever. But if they get help and feedback themselves or you, etc., that feedback lets them improve what they're saying. And so it gets towards great. But we don't start with great. Nothing starts with great. So that's a strategic piece of the how to. The other thing I would tell you is that I wish I had chairs that fit better. Maybe we need a better camera in the back. I can do that. So the other thing with how to that you want them to understand is that they also are engaged in a process of understanding that when you write, you just make it up. It doesn't exist before. And you're not trying to actually figure out what to say in your head. You can't do that. You don't know what you're going to write before you write it, unless you memorize something. What you can have is an intention, and then you start playing with word, and each word changes it. So let's show them how to do that. So we're going to have an intention. We've not practiced this, have we?
No.
Okay. So we're going to have an intention, and the intention is we want to we're going to tell someone to we're writing a sentence telling someone to get off of the roof. A little boy, Jack, is on the roof. Okay.
Okay.
Or Ralph is on the roof. You like simulation? Is that better? So Jack's on the roof, and so what we're going to do is alternate words, and we want to tell Jack to get down. Okay. So you can start.
Jack.
What
Are
you
doing
with
with
Jack? What do
that
you?
broom?
No,
Oh,
you
wait.
got one word.
With that.
That, Jack, what are you doing with that stuffed beaver
And
the ladder,
on
the
roof.
we,
Want
you,
to
immediately.
and carefully.
Now you did 2 words.
Oh, and
Carefully.
come
Down.
now. But we have
Or you can't talk. Or
you
will
be
free
to
stay
in
your
room.
forever. Okay, so all we're doing is we could not have compiled those sentences together. They actually were a reaction to each other, but we still had the intention of getting it down. That's all your kids are going to be doing. They have an intention. So they want, in one of our exercises, they want to do something with the mud walk on the cliffs of Ravad, and so they wind up writing a little story about it. So we prompt them, but everything is about that intention and then finding the words, but you're making it up. You're making up the words, you're making up the intention, you're making up whatever it is. And when they understand, it's real freeing. So every day they're going to be writing the way we did it. Mostly they could write about anything they want to. They needed prompts, we give them such. We had, numbers, but they can write a description of a pickle jar, or they can, write
What they did yesterday.
what they did yesterday.
Just a lot of them wanted to write their own stories that continued on and on and on. And or a thank you note to sometimes that would be I insisted.
Yeah, or
thank you to
or just a newsy letter to grandparents.
Yeah,
you would do
right,
that.
things like that.
Yeah, so
A
they
book report later when they're
yeah, we talk about that as well. So they can do lots of little things, but the fact is, any kind of writing is going to be great because it's still engaging the process. And the fiction tends to be easier when they're making up stories because you just make it up and it's their story. And stories tend to lead to something. The fisherman pulled the fish on the bank, and then what? Once upon a time. In fact, that's probably the best prompt you could ever do. If you just write down the top of the paper for a kid, once upon a time, and then have them go, that'll probably be a good writing session. Tell them to stop.
Sure.
So yeah, so that's essentially the how-to. And so it's day in and day out. And then you want to give them feedback. I mean, there are other principles obviously that go in it. Grammar, look, if it sounds okay, it probably is okay. And if it sounds better, it is better. So that's to get help, right? In spelling, part of what we teach is the problem with spelling is that people that spell poorly guess at the spelling, and people who spell well never guess. And you want to train your child to never guess. Either use a word you know how to spell, or look up a word, or you can write it down and mark it and look it up later. And we have a process for that. So that punctuation's the same. They don't have to clutter their mind with a bunch of rules because punctuation was built out of people, linguists, figuring out how to take a language and put it into written symbols. So a period is like a long pause, and a comma is a shorter pause. And so when you read things, oops, when I read, yeah, so that's a good sentence. When we talk about, and I would do this to kids, I would read it, how they punctuated. Let's say I have no punctuation in this. When we talk about problems in a day-to-day manner, we certainly say, I don't want blank. But that's not as punctuated. It has a comma after manner, has a comma after say, it has quote marks, and then a period. So it reads like this. When we talk about problems in a day-to-day manner, we certainly say, I don't want blank. So there's something about wants and motivation. However, and there's a comma. However, we are looking at how to make the problem go away. Longer pause. That's all they need to learn and practice with the nature of the grammar. So So, I mean, the punctuation and the grammar. So, understanding that it's just everyday writing, they've mastered the sentence. And once you master a sentence, and it's going to sound okay because if it sounds okay, it is okay. If it sounds better, it's going to be better because they already have grammar hardwired in them. They can read, especially if they can read and speak. They already got it. They're there. So learning to translate that and then find their voice and play around with how to say it in different ways, etc. That's what that writing process is all about. And so you give them feedback in a very simple way. We have a more developed way to do it, but I'll tell you the basic hint is you want to get a red pen and a green pen. And when you write, you want to use that green pen, things that you like, that you want to see more of, that's really great, do more of that. This was a great sentence. That gives some feedback on something that was clear, made sense. If indeed there's something needs correction, that's a red pen. That's stop. And then you let them have time to go do the correction, to write it correctly, or to adjust
every
it.
day.
Yeah, every
That
day, every day.
You correct, you evaluate it, give them feedback, they correct it that day.
Yeah. And if you're prone to give them suggestions of how to say it better or learn something, say it this way. Does this sound better? So they're in I wrote okay, I'm getting help. And you're just saying, does this sound better? And if they say no, I wouldn't get an argument. But a lot of times they go, yeah, then they've learned, oh, this sounds better. And they write it down, their corrections.
And I would say, of course, our course has so much more information in it, but when they're just starting out, there is no need to correct 50 things on their page. That will just be overwhelming and discouraging to them. Pick what you want to focus on for a week or two. You want to focus on maybe capitalizations for a week or two, or you want to focus on, I don't, handwriting. Sometimes you have to go back on that one. That's a good one to, sometimes you go, hey, y'all have gotten really sloppy. We're going to just back up and work on handwriting for a couple of weeks, but don't overwhelm them with too many corrections when they're young, because most of your children will have a lot of things wrong in there on their first.
Yeah, I would even say it differently. I would probably, when they're young, I'd just stick to one thing. So it might be a capital letter after a period. Maybe that's what they need to get down. Or it may need to be really, some of it could be even on the handwriting level of keeping the letters on the line or keeping the letters the same size. You know, we go through that.
Yeah.
So, but anything, it could be, the use of commas. And I would just get the kids to read it out loud. Read it out loud. Or I'd read it out loud how they punctuated, and without the comma, I just read through it. And Billy John and I, excuse me, Billy John and I, and they go, no, Billy, John, and I. They need commas, and they'd say, oh, a comma goes there. They'd get it. So that's the game. All right, so that's I think enough of the how-to. Also, if you'll keep their writing, besides them enjoying looking at it, you can also measure progress. And then if you ever have to show the authorities.
Right. And I think I said at the beginning, spiral notebooks, we did not use that for writing. Sorry, we did for math. Just loose leaf notebook paper and then put into a 3-ring binder.
And that was partly because they were doing corrections on it and we could move the sheets around or whatever. So,
and that's also why we have the every other line that they write on, because then you can correct on the in between line.
Yeah, so let me I see some comments here, and if you have questions about the writing, that'd be great, or if you think things to throw in. Someone asks about utilizing visualization. This relates to writing, and quotes Huberman talks about it, that when I learn something about physics or whatever, I visualize concept or visualize through the mind palace technique. So that's a memory issue. For example, I'm learning about specific chemical reactions, any physics concepts, visualize me doing the experiment, the more detailed. The mind can't really differentiate between visual actions and real life actions, according to Huberman. So it's useful to get. Yeah, so I totally agree with him, except I think he's making it up about telling the difference and whatever. They do this kind of like people that believe in a subconscious, which that's not a thing, but Bible has invited us to think it is. So when visualizing, it's not just physics, it's especially physics. So the story is Einstein, imagine himself riding on a beam of light at the speed of light, and then looking out to the side and looking in a mirror. And the question would you see yourself in a mirror? And his conclusion, physics conclusion, was not of the day. They would say, no, you're moving ahead. By the time the light goes, you know, from the mirror back to you, you look and it comes back, you will have passed it, traveling so fast. And he just said, I think I'd see myself in the mirror. That's part of where relativity came from. So visualizing anything, but it's not just science, it's everything. I do it all the time and spent some years being trained in it. I know Jody got exhausted of me turning any sentences or anything anybody says into visual pictures. So it's somewhat automatic to me now, but I work at it. And there's even an approach in uh, reading and writing. I've lost the name of it.
Oh, Bill.
Yeah, Bell, something Bell. I'll think of a
Sorry,
second.
but it was
Is a process of learning how to visualize. So when you visualize things, you're just smarter. You makes you smarter because you're looking at the structure of things and you can move them around. So even when I look at a sentence, for example, I'm learning about a specific chemical reaction. So that statement is great, but I can visualize someone and they have maybe a box of examples or things they're showing. And this one is specifically about throwing chemicals together and they react to each other. I might have them boxing or fighting. It might get imaginative, but usually doesn't need that. But I can see a picture about specific chemical reaction. So they're chemicals, and it's a very distinct reaction. And for me, it throws out uh, a diamond shape, and I exit out. It throws a circle, exit out. Throws out a cube, and I go check mark. So I'm when I even that's a little too symbolic, but I can see instantly in that picture that it's really about a specific reaction between these two chemicals, not a general one. So get clarity. And when you look at it that way, by the time you do that, you'll remember it too, because that plays in. But I don't want to underplay that it's common out there to say we think in pictures and not in words, and that's just not true. I don't lame. I don't know. But it's certainly a part of the conversation. But obviously, people who are blind can't quite do that with the way we do. But I need to study a little more of that. But there's so much more. There's so much you can do with words too. But thinking think through with clarity and logic and understand the pieces and the elements. I mean, honestly, just getting your child to read a paragraph and go through and say, who are the characters in here? And what was the relationship between the characters? And uh, how did they how does it I'd say how does it move through time? So and then what and then what and then what? And when they understand that and they're seeing the characters and the actions and the movement through time, they're going to understand that paragraph wonderfully. And they're probably going to naturally picture some anyway. But I think practicing on it is really great. Da Vinci would do that. He would literally look at a picture or a scene like in the park, close his eyes and describe as much as he could, open it up and see what he got right and what he left out and do it again. He literally practiced that sort of thing. So I'm all for it.
that would be easy to do with kids.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So great question. See if I get any other comments in here. Not seeing, but I know there's a little delay in that. I do know that your children, as they read, their writing will improve because they're learning from other people, and they'll probably learn kind of genres and areas about writing. Um, but different kinds of writing, imaginative literature, etc. But in that process, you're really wanting them to just learn to master sentences and information, because then applying it to letters or applying it to essays and all gets to be pretty easy. I remember one time we were in had a group of kids at home and are at the house, 10 of them going through writing course material. And what we did, I remember I would have them do exercises. And I remember, okay, time to write, you got a deadline, write on this, I'd give them a prompt. And they were all writing. This one child, I remember who it um, was sitting there doing this. I watched him a little bit. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm thinking of what to write." I said, "Oh, I've totally misunderstood, or your parents did. This is writing class, not thinking class. I'll have a thinking class, and I'll be glad to charge your parents for it. But this is writing class." And this is part of the game. You don't want to get caught up in your brain with grammar, punctuation, or whatever, or thinking what you want to say. It's just, I want to stress that point. The kids are going to learn to be able to write something okay because they're going to find out, oh, you can erase it and scratch through. If I don't like it, I can throw it away. Whoop-de-doo. So I do for the grandkids. So that is a magnificent and powerful piece of the story. Anyway, we hope you found this helpful. Pass it along to your friends. This is the way to go. I mean, obviously we have a course, but we're not trying to make money. We're just trying to make a difference. We want you to engage your kids in writing. If you find other ways to do it, great. If you subject them to a tedious, correct way to write, that's not going to develop them as writers. They can learn that too. And look, you're going to have grammar checks and all this kind of stuff out here. It's like everybody's got an editor now. Whoopee. And they're not always right. I've run Hemingway through Grammarly and he flunks terribly. So there's that. But getting them engaged in writing every day and they learn to build confidence, get better, you're going to do great. And if they, bray at it, this is why we put the course together. So there's a workbook, you go through it, you don't grade them. It's 20 lessons, and then there's an essay course and a whole bunch of other stuff with it. So if you're interested in such things, there will be a link in the chat for that sort of thing. That's not what we're aiming at. We're aiming at you getting empowered to empower your kid to teach themselves how to write. And they do that by writing. So we really hope this has been helpful and look forward